Hey, my name's Bruce Snell. I'm with BSG International, and today we're continuing our classes in our Applied Business Science Base Skills series. What we're going to be covering today is our project management, and if you look at, we're in Part 5, and Part 5 is where we're talking about the analytical skills for the personnel internally within the organization. This, with all the other ones, along with our base skills, is that what we're saying is that everybody internally within the organization needs to have these base skills in order to pull this thing off. And what you're going to be seeing as we move through this, all the reasons in the world of why these base skills have to be communicated for long-term success and trained through the organization. So if you look at your handout and your classwork, we're going to look at page number 1, and we're going to go over our executive summary. And this is kind of a summary of everything that we're going to be having in the workshop here. So don't get caught up or be too panicky. We're going to cover everything that we're talking about here. This is just to give us a view. If you look at the steering committee, okay, as we drive this, we need to look at what is that steering committee and who is that. Usually there's someone in the organization, is what we talked about, has got to basically got to sponsor this thing. For this project management, we're going to say there's going to be a steering committee that is going to be selected, and they're basically going to overview this whole process. And note, the steering committee must have an agreed upon good organizational structure, because as we go through project management, I don't care how big, if you start crossing departments and departmental and division, you're going to make sure we have to have a clear organizational structure. And if you look at the organizational structure, we need to list the organizations, the divisions, departments, the heads of those organizations and divisions, as well as the department heads. If you look at number 3, facilitator manager responsibilities. What we're talking about here, in order to facilitate this, we need to make sure that all our management are involved in the process and that they have their roles and responsibilities, which we'll go over. So everybody in the organization that is a manager will be termed what we call a facilitator manager for this product or process. Next is our steering committee events and action. This is formalizing the steering committee and a project statement, because what we're talking about here is that as we go through and whatever this project management, we want to make sure we have a clear statement and understanding of where we're going to go. So it's very important at this stage that we come through with whatever that project is and have a good statement, as what we've heard throughout this whole thing. Processes to help organize your direction and thoughts. We're going to give you some processes that's going to help you think through what we've got to do in order to accomplish this project management. Team management, the process formed to manage. What we're looking at here is how are we going to manage the teams as we start building these this project management throughout the organization. Then we're getting back to the old faithful here is our Base Work Systems 2000 kit. And this is all the forms and all the stuff in these processes that we're going to need in order to successfully do a project management. If you look at page number 2, page 2 is how to make a good problem statement or a project statement. What we're looking at here is that make sure when we're doing this is similar to so much other stuff that we're doing, is to make sure we have a good problem statement. One of the things, the first one is make sure we don't get this enormous, massive statement of a problem. We want to make sure, that's why we need to take this time and clarify exactly in this project, what are we trying to do? Because we can go in with grand ideas and these big, wide statements, but we really want to focus it in and spend that time in that steering committee coming to an agreement on what is it that we're organizing this project management for. And the project management can be not necessarily overall organization, be down in the organization, by a department, by a division. This is why we have to have those base skills throughout. State the problem narrowly enough so the team can handle it. Make sure you state it. Don't look at and say these enormous, massive statements. Again, focus in on the problem narrowly enough so we can focus on it and achieve it. Write the problem as a declarative statement, not a question. Make sure we write that thing and make sure we state exactly or in the direction that we're supposed to go. Be detailed rather than general. And how many of these things we get? We have these wide sweeping statements, and what we're saying here, be detailed. Wherever we can, be detailed in that statement to make sure that we're leading this project in the right direction. Avoid mentioning blame, causes, or solution, because as you get into these project management, what you're going to see is we start going into these different departments, base work centers, process systems, divisions. You're going to see that as we get in there and start trying to fix these things or bring it about, you're going to have people that are going to be pointing fingers of why we can't do it, why we can't support it, why we didn't do whatever it was we were supposed to. So we want to focus in on the issues and then use measurable quantities when possible. If we're saying that whatever that project, try to put some units of measure in there of what we're trying to obtain. And then if you look at the solution, is that if you look at for whatever that project is, we want to make sure the clear statement, and what you're going to see as we move through this is that the chances are the success is going to depend on how well we make that problem statement up front, and we organize the systems around it and the teams around it to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. So let's make sure we make a good problem statement, and that's what we got to start with the steering committee, because somebody is getting this project off the ground, and that can be from building a new facility to moving from one facility to the other. This is bringing on a new product line, or bringing on a new piece of equipment. This is how we can use this. Let's look on page 4. It says the selection process. We're looking at the selection process of how we go about getting all these people that are going to help us run this project management. We want to have the steering committee and representatives. The steering committee are, again, the ones that are kind of overseeing this project. The coordinator kind of interacts with the teams, the task teams, everybody through the organization, reporting back up to the steering committee and keeping them advised on where we're at. And the reason we have the coordinator out there is that most of the time the steering committee is several different representatives. So if you look at the coordinator, we're going to have at least one point of contact to communicate where we're at and what we're doing to the decision makers or the sponsor of this particular project. Facilitators, the steering committee select those, and usually up front it's with our management. The facilitators help the teams, the team structure, and on the reporting process. Facilitator manager, we term that, is that everybody in the organization that has somebody reporting to them that's in management, they are a facilitator manager, because they're going to have to facilitate in their particular departments by base work center, that in turn the systems that they have by process. So this is real important for our facilitator managers to be tuned in to what we're doing and where we're going. Management, involvement, and leadership. Everybody in the management has to be involved in the process. Anybody, if we're taking it by department, we need to have all the department management. If we're taking the thing by a division, all the division managers. We need to make sure that management is participating, because I've made that mistake years ago, and it was kind of volunteer, didn't ask everyone to get involved because that's what we were told. What we realized is that when it started happening in that person's department, because of the 4 barriers and the fear and all that, they kind of started getting I don't know, I'm not sure if it was fear, but they were surely getting upset with what we were doing. And plus, the employees started understanding more about what was happening and where we were going than their folks they were reporting to, that made them dig their heels in even further. Team leaders, department managers, they make sure they get those teams of those base work centers of those processes that are going to help us through. Team members are really the ones that are involved in those process steps and procedures in that particular team or task team. So, and they come from management, non-management, or whatever. Okay, now if we'll look at page 5 and look at the roles and responsibility as we go through this and start trying to figure out how we're going to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor this as we go through this project. Let's look at the team members. What are their roles and responsibility? The team members are going to function basically in their area of expertise and control in their base work center. And what we want to do is that whatever that project is that we're trying to manage and move through, we want to look at making sure that everybody in their area of expertise and control is involved as a team member to fix that process. Because remember, who's the best person to tell you how to do it? Person doing the job. Team leaders. The team leaders kind of help orchestrate what we're doing internally within the organization and keep it and function as a team, and they're leading the team. It's not necessarily what we don't want is for them to do all the work. We've got to give them the tools to orchestrate this team meeting and give our employees the base skills to help them pull off this project. The coordinator is kind of the administrator for this whole thing, as we've talked before. And what we're looking at is that as we go through and we're managing, planning, scheduling, and monitoring, coordinating, making sure that everything is happening, the coordinator is the person that does that, mainly reporting back to the steering committee. Facilitator managers. Remember, everybody in the organization that's a manager that has someone reporting to them is what we term a facilitator manager. And if you look at that, the facilitator manager will be over that particular team or base work center involved in those processes that are reporting to the base work centers that are reporting to them. Now let's look at the facilitator. The facilitator is really kind of acting in a dual role here. They're kind of also reporting on the process, and they're also helping the team and the team leaders. And what we're talking about there is that if the team leader's not there, the facilitator is going to carry on the team. The facilitator is also collecting monthly overviews, meeting minutes, and all that other stuff. Resource person. If you remember from our other classes, what we talked about, a team functions well between 4 and 7 employees. When we start getting more than that, they start having their own conversation, and it's really hard to agree on anything. So if we're looking at a resource person, example, if we have 10 base work centers that are involved in this particular project or process or system, is that we're going to say, okay, let's put 5 on the team, and the other 5 are going to be resource people. And what we're talking about that is that as these 5 develop that system, that process, they're also going to bring in these other 5 as resource people as they need them. Also, too, if we define a procedure or a process that they're involved in, they're also going to act as a resource person to sign off on it and approve, and also help to give suggestions, but only as the team sees fit. This is how we keep the numbers down to where we can function as a team. And of course, the steering committee are the ones that establish all this stuff in regards to how to. And what has happened in most of the companies and the things that are out there, we talk about all these grand ideas, but we never give a tool. What we're going to give you today is the tool to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor this whole thing, all the way down to the form of collecting the minutes for the teams. If you look at now page 6, this is now we're working through the process to start formalizing our steering committee. What we do is that, as we talked about always with the sponsor, we really want the sponsor involved in the steering committee, and we also too want to formalize that. So here we use this form here to start listing the steering committee. Then if we look at page 7, this is an involvement and delegation setup of what we're saying, the things that we need to do as a steering committee as kind of a check off and a guideline that's going to help us orchestrate through this thing. If you look at the steering committee's processes needed and are encouraged for the use in this project management, that's what this whole thing's about. You might pick and choose or use bits and pieces of it, but this is a good way for us to organize our thoughts and direction. If you look at 1, the sponsor of the project sponsor should be involved in the steering committee project. Again, with the problem statement, and we're looking at pages 1 through 6 of what we talked about to get to there. Now let's look at the steering committee team process in regards to the steering committee events and actions. If you look at number 2, it says startup. It's going to tell us what we need to do to start this thing up, the involvement and delegation, things to remember, because remember, we're trying to give you an outline because it's really tough to get going. Once we get going and we have some kind of a structure, it makes it a lot easier, and we don't have as many miscued or steps because we kind of have a form, well, we don't kind of, we do. We have a formal process. The steering committee preliminary budget worksheet. On some of these projects, we need to make sure that if we have these ideas and what we need to do, that we're able to budget and make a preliminary budget. We're not saying getting down and spend a gazillion hours and time, but we want to make sure and put together the budget, and we want to make that budget by all that check sheet that we're talking about, as well as budgets by particular base work centers, departments, and divisions. And that's one of the preliminary things that the steering committee will do. Then we also have the action items of stuff that we have to do for that. And we want to look at delegation of the events and actions of the SPMA form. And that's going to help us. That action item is going to say, okay, who's going to work on the 4 barriers, who's going to work on the budget, who's going to work on the process and steps. So this is going to be that worksheet. We're going to look at delegating all these A through Z on there, the worksheet, and the managed plan scheduling and monitoring of the project. Now let's look down at the processes to help organize your directions and your thoughts. What we're looking at here, these projects, whether they start as a problem solving or they start with an idea of what we got to do, we're going to have some skills and some tools, and this is what a lot of these workshops, these classes have been building up to give these base skills. I think if nothing else, as we go through this thing, what you will learn is that how important it is to have these base skills throughout the organization. And when we first started, a lot of people were thinking these base skills were meant for frontline folks. Everybody in the organization has to have these base skills, as well as we have to give you a tangible system and a process for success. And that's what I believe a lot of the stuff that we've been lacking. So if you look at processes to help, we want to look at the worksheet, the quality issue audit, the system development, and also too the one for the brainstorming for problems and solutions. Because as we get in there with that project management, we're going to look at and what we have to do from all the way from a systems development to the problem solving to the audits of the quality issues. Now we want to look at the team management. Okay, what we're going to provide for the organization, we're going to have a schedule, and that's the team schedule of all the teams when they're meeting, because we need to schedule this out. Because if we don't schedule the length of the project, what you're going to see is that we'll never have time, or we'll be doing all of it. It's like cramming for an exam. We usually do it the night before. So what we want to do is systematically set out these schedules to accomplish our project. So we're going to also have a team log that is going to literally list all the teams on that we can manage as the steering committee. Now let's look at the team member. We're also going to have a team member form, and that's going to list all the team members in that particular team. And remember, we're trying to keep it by base work center, our department, our internal customer and supplier relationship. Okay, the action item processes, there's going to be some action items of things that we have to do and move through. Then we're going to have the team minutes. Then we're going to have a monthly overview. The team minutes is for the teams to record what they're doing. The monthly overview is what we're going to manage this project with from the steering committee. Because monthly, the facilitator is going to take where we're at, what we're doing, are we on schedule, are we not, and we're going to take it back. And this is what the steering committee is going to do. Their main thing is to hold accountable. Because of the 4 barriers, what you're going to see as it gets down there, it's going to be tough for me to tell my boss they have to go to a meeting. It's going to be tough to tell that 1% or that bad employee that they have to go to a meeting, they have to get their work on. This is the job of the coordinator and of the steering committee. When we move through this, we want to make sure that we can make those tough decisions. And we've talked about that. The tough decisions are, again, holding accountable on what we agreed on. And we're agreed on that we're going to take this project and we're going to move through to implementation. Now we want to look at the task team, because as the teams start working, there are going to be separate task teams that are going to break out to accomplish this project, to help bring back information to work on by base work centers. So we're also going to have a team or task team within that. Example, I'm a team leader or I'm team A. We're also going to assign out and need to have those skills by team of different task teams that are going to be happening. The team will go out like this, work on some projects and bring it back in. That's how we're going to accomplish it and manage it. We're going to have a task team log. We're going to have a task team collection log, and then we're going to have a task team process. Literally what's going to happen is that we're going to be able to collect and manage where we're at and what the teams are working on and what the task teams are working on. Then that's the old familiar Base Work Systems 2000 kit. That's for the teams of all the forms and all the stuff that we need to make sure that we formalize what we're doing in the process. So now let's look at page number 8. Now, page number 8 is for the steering committee to start looking at the involvement and the delegation. If you look at this, what we're talking about is really breaking down and looking at the organization and the organizational structure, as well as those base work centers. If you look at the organization, A there, we want to look at, okay, for that organization, how many divisions or how many different organizations or how many companies, and we want to list those here. So with some of our larger companies, or we actually have in some of our mid-sized companies, profit centers or something that are called divisions. So we want to list all the divisions there. Then next, we want to list all the departments, and usually all the departments under those particular divisions. So what we might have is that for each of these, if nothing else, department or division heads, they will each have a form and they will each go through this thing, and then they will collect this data to where we will know and set up. That's why it's very important that we have the organizational structure agreed on before we get going in this. Because when we start getting in, and if that structure is not done, what we're going to do is that we're going to have people trying to either go and they feel like they're either stepping on somebody's toes or they're going behind somebody's back. So it's very important in everything that we do to make sure we have that organizational structure laid out. So we got the departments, we want to list all those departments. So right now, let's just look at as we got the one division. Now we're going to list all the departments under division. Now we want to list that department manager and department head. Then we want to look at the management facilitator manager that are reporting up to those managers. Now we want to look at by facilitator manager, the reporting based work centers one level. So this form will really go down through as we collect the data to bring back up. And that's going to help give us a structure or an agreement on base work centers if we have not already done the organizational chart and confirmed that. Because it sounds real simple, like we know what our organization, our structure is, we got it on the computer. Looks completely different down on the floor, and especially if you're addressing issues that we're going to be crossing over base work centers and departments, it gets real touchy. And when the bigger the company, the more the 4 barriers are going to be showing up, and especially the fear. So let's look at now page 9. These are the things to remember, and we've talked about this, and you're going to see everything that we're going to be doing is going to be working through, all of us are processing some step of our organization's product or service of our order request. So if you look at this, really the thing to remember is that no matter what we're doing in the organization, we're all processing some step of our sale, if nothing else. Things we have to do upon receipt of an order request. We have to be able to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. So everything that we're doing as a project manager, we want to make sure that we've got that order request, we're thinking that also how we're going to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. Because this is also going to build and help define those base work centers as well as give us a direction on the accounting process. Now let's look at the managing, planning, scheduling, and monitoring of the 4 M's, the manpower, machine, materials, methods. The availabilities to process the order request. As we're building this and we're looking at this project, let's just say that we're bringing on a new product line. We need to make sure and look at the capacities of the 4 M's. Also to the inventory. Number one, do we have that stuff in inventory? Where are we going to buy it? And what are the existing inventory levels if we do? And also to the lead times. So you're looking at this, no matter what we're doing, the lead times can either be by moving from one department to the next, the flow, the whole thing. Data support. How do we manage and monitor the daily action and events and actions of the organization? We want to look at the data entry, the data collection that gives focus to the base work center and the organization, our monthly, quarterly updates to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. And then we want to look at the continuous improvement pie. We want to look at here past, present, projected, and progress, and start with good managing, planning, scheduling, and monitoring. So if you look at these are the things to remember as we're moving through the steering committee. These are what we want to think about as we're writing that problem statement, as we start delegating this thing down. These are the things we need to remember as the steering committee for a successful project. Now, we mentioned a little earlier, like all this stuff, everything that we talked about, we're now giving you the forms and the process to do that. And if you want to, after class, you can go back and look up front and kind of follow through and put that with the form. If you look at this, the preliminary budget, we want to give you this worksheet here to literally go down on page 10 and look through on the preliminary budget of what these things are that are affecting or they're going to affect that project. And if you look at that, we really want to look at a preliminary budget. If it's something ridiculous, chances are we're not going to be able to do it, or it's going to tell us what we can and we can't do. So we, first of all, before we get started in this massive undertaking, is that if it is a massive undertaking, is make sure that we're within budget. And it's not necessarily dollars, but we're budgeting the time, the people, the machinery, everything. So we want to look at what are those things that we need to look at for budgeting purposes. And if you look at now page 11, this is the action item or quick action of the delegation of the events. If you look at, as we're going through this to try to get us a budget from this A to Z, page 11 is really the action item form as we go through this and delegate out as the steering committee to see if we've got the monies or the funds or the equipment or the people or whatever it is, the process is in place. So literally, if you look at its budget, manage, plan, schedule, and monitor, task team, action item, quick action, 4 barriers to quality, is that affecting our particular process or our budget? The sponsor and the completion, which goes with the form we just looked at. So again, as the steering committee, we're going to come in and delegate these actions, and we want to make sure we have an action item formed and written that, number one, who's accepting it, who's doing it, and when are we going to have it done? Because we're going to have to hold it accountable. And if you look there under the comments, it says reference information is that workshop, and that was the one we just covered. Okay, now let's look at page 12. Okay, now page 12 is that we want to look at the actual workshop or the worksheet that we'll be using, the team will be using, and it'll have literally taken all those things we just discovered that we're saying it's a preliminary budget, it's a go. Now, as the organization and as the steering committee, we need to look at these things and look at what is involved in these base work centers and these processes, these steps, to make sure that we delegate it out for our project. So this here, again, will help us line up. Example, let's just take J. We're saying there what material. What material are we going to be needing? And do we have a budget for it? How are we going to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor? Do we need to assign a task team? Are there action items? And how do the 4 barriers affect it? So if you look at this worksheet here, not only will we use it up at the steering committee, but we'll use it all the way down through the process, and literally it'll go all the way down through to the teams. Remember, it's easier to use a check sheet and to go with something tangible than to think through everything. We're all thinking and going in the same direction. And it's just good to have a guideline and a written process. So now let's look at page number 13. Page number 13 is the managing, planning, scheduling, and monitoring of the project. If you look at this, it says start with A and work your way through Z. That's the form that we talked about. And if you look at it, it's just literally marked A through Z. And the worksheet used as follows: the steering committee team to delegate out the processes to the facilitator manager. The facilitator managers use it as a check sheet for their teams, and they're making sure that they're working through to do their part of the project. For each of the teams, they could spin out to a task team to focus on those events and actions of the issues. What we're talking about there is that now we're looking at that particular worksheet. We're now moving from the steering committee. Now we're coming down to where it's the facilitator manager. They're going to delegate it out to those existing teams. Okay, so now the teams might even have this. Now they're going to take it and say, okay, in order to get, what is the capacity for the equipment or the machinery that we're going to be using? We'll spin out and go into a task team, and that task team will basically work through the process. And remember, who needs to be on that task team? The people that have and own or that particular process, that step, or that procedure, their base work centers. So remember, everything that we're doing in this whole ABS thing, we're really breaking the whole organization down by base work centers, and we're also breaking and delegating out the actions by our base work centers and the accountability. So number 2 is delegation of actions for success. We're looking at how do we delegate. We have one-level reporting concept. The one-level reporting concept is what we're talking about here, is that we only want to go with our management and the organization one level down. We don't need one person 4 levels down through the organization trying to manage it. Basically, I'm taking my marching orders and I'm delegating one level down. Now, if we're in the upper levels, we could have a layer of management reporting to management. Well, that's fine too, and that's going to become another facilitator manager and another team. Then as we're working down, it's pretty much going to be my manager and my boss, those reporting-based work centers. So if you look at that, we're able to focus on by base work centers, our systems and processes, and those system and processes of those base work centers. Then we want to look at number 3, the budget. What is the budget for the product, or do we need to determine a project or a cost? So we're going to look at what is that particular budget, and that is all the way down by the base work center. Now what we're doing is just following all the way down that form from A to Z, and these are the questions. Do we have to assign it out? So we want to look at whatever through A through Z, are we managing, planning, scheduling, and monitoring? And then do we need to assign a task team? Okay, then we want to look at the action item, quick action. Then we also want to look at, are the 4 barriers to quality affecting it? Then we want to look at who is the sponsor. When is the completion date? Who is the person sponsored, and when are we going to complete it? And then we want to look at the summary of the issues. Depending on the complexity of the project, the sponsor needs to use a SPMA worksheet as a check sheet to make sure that we're all covering the issues for a successful project. That's what we're saying. That sheet is literally going to take care of all these items that you're needing, no matter what in the world or what project that you're going to be working on. The bigger the project, the more the things that you're going to have. But what this does again is help us organize our thoughts so we're all looking at the same thing. Now let's look at page number 14. Page number 14 is looking at the processes to help organize your direction and your thoughts. If you look at these are action items. Again, they can be delegated out by the teams, by the steering committee, by the facilitator managers, but these are the action items depending on how large or how small the project is. So that's what we would use to start delegating this stuff out. Now again, let's look at 15. Here's that SPMA worksheet. Okay, do we need to delegate that out? Who's going to do that? Are we going to take this sheet by base work center, by department? We need to probably be working this thing all the way down through the process with all the different levels, because each one's going to have to be involved in all of these things that are going to be affecting not only the project, but their base work centers. Now let's look at the quality issue audit. Now, the larger the product or larger the project, we need to be very concerned of these quality issue audit. Because this quality issue audit is going to really look at how we're going to do several different things, from the 4 barriers to quality. How is it going to be affecting the project that we're going to be doing? Not necessarily overall the project. How are these 4 barriers to quality might be affecting me helping with the project? Is there fear? Can I step up? So what we're going to do here, this is a good way to audit not only by the success of the project, but individually into those base work centers. The processing and supporting of the order, the request, the product and service. Again, rate it from 1 to 5, 5 being the strongest concerns, meaning the product. If we're looking at the processing, supporting of the product, I have a real strong concern. I'll put 5, and we want you to put your comments out there. Usually the best way is that these audits and all these surveys are taken individually, and then they're turned into the coordinator, and I'd suggest not signing these things too because of the 4 barriers to quality. Now we want to look at the managing, planning, scheduling, and monitoring of this particular quality issue statement. Now this could really evolve out of this big project, moved all the way down to a specific process in my base work center. Not necessarily the overall project, but really what we're focusing on and everything that we're doing. Delegating the actions down, being able to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor, given the tools of the direction all the way through with the base skills and the forms and the written process, and then we really want everybody in their base work center focusing in. Then we want to look at the 4 M's in regards to the support of the project: manpower, machine, materials, methods. Now let's look at the workplace profile. Number 1, people, personality, procedure, process, systems. Are there these things in places? Are they not? Do we have the people there? Do we have people that have personality problems or that are resisting the change? These are the things that we need to be honest, and because of the fear and the 4 barriers and our track record and our prejudice perception and all these issues that we're bringing, I would suggest, again, if you notice, there's not a slot for your name on there. I would do these, pass them out, and have a turn-in box to where the employees can turn these things back in, anonymous, to where we can take them back, the coordinator picks them up, and they report and talk to them with their steering committee first, because if there's fear, and believe me, through the organization you're going to see that. Number 1, we run right back. You remember we're saying use the organizational chain. Well, what if that kink in the chain is my boss? And then all of a sudden they're coming back, there's only 3 of us in there. All of a sudden I'm feeling pretty uncomfortable. So the thing is that we take it back up to the steering committee, get a game plan, and deal with the data, and then we help orchestrate the deal. And we help orchestrate it from the steering committee to the facilitator managers all the way down through the process. Now remember, with this quality issue, as we're moving through this project and we hit some snags because of some personalities or the fear or whatever, or we're pulling off of a project because we haven't done much managing and planning, and now it's taking me off the project and pulling me behind, or I'm not getting support from other departments or other base work centers with stuff I need, this is where we're saying the quality issue form again will work. But we're asking you to really sort through, and you can use that same audit to report a quality issue that the other department's not participating and they're not getting involved and not doing their work. Number 17, let's look at the system development, because most of this stuff that we're going to be working on is going to have to do with a system. So this is a really good process to look at developing that system, set up. What is that system? What is that product or service of that system? What are the base work centers involved? What is the paperwork involved? What's the data entry? What are the processes in the system? Do we have process and step worksheet? And if you look out to the right, they're all task teams. If we're going through this, we can assign these things out to start building them and bringing them back in to support the project. If you look at, this is why it's so important for the base skills, and this is why it's so important with the 4 barriers to quality. If you look at everything that we've done on this ABS thing, is that no matter what we're doing in the organization, we're having to look at people, process, and procedure, and we're also having to look at how these 4 barriers are interacting with whatever we're trying to accomplish internally with this particular project. Now let's look at 18. If you look at page 18, brainstorming for problem solution, we can use the same form as we had in a workshop earlier to literally organize our thoughts. Is that I've been given this part of the process to work with, so now what do? Okay, let's get the team together, and if we have to go out into a task team or we do it in the team, is that we use this thing. Okay, what are our problems to help support this project? Then which problem will we work on? And we go through the whole thing, and why is it happening? And do we have the data collection? Do we have to display it? Then we want to look at the presentation to support if we have to. Also, we want to look at the bottom. Out of all this stuff that we're talking about doing, there's the action items to help you accomplish 1 through 5 up there. And this form here can help you do your part. Now remember, depends on the complexity and how big this thing is. We really, whether it's this big or this big, we want to break it all down by base work center, by our individual processes. Okay, again, that's reinforcing why we have to have these base skills. Okay, next, let's look at 19, team management. Okay, now as we're going through the steering committee that's now looking at the project that we're doing, and now we're giving us some tools, and these tools are for everybody. We want to look at how are we going to manage these teams. If it's a big project and it involves everybody, we're looking at this project, breaking it up into teams. Again, I'm going to repeat, by department, by division, by base work center, by process, by system. How do we manage all these teams? Here's the process that we're going to use, and this is the action items to go out. Example, let's just look at action item number 1. It says team schedule. Okay, I might be the one that volunteers for that, and as we're building the teams, I'm making sure I'm collecting team schedules or I'm scheduling the team meetings. So that's what we do. We use this form here. Now this can be used by the facilitator, facilitator manager, team leader, the team, the steering committee, the same thing. How are we going to manage our participation in the project? Now if you look at on page 19, I'd like for us now to look at the forms that are going to be involved in this thing. If you look at page number 20, we're talking about the team schedule. We're going to go through all of these forms that we need in order to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor this thing successfully. Okay, number 20, here's the schedule. We have a 12-month schedule. We want to schedule these things out as far as in advance as we can. And as we talked about in our base work systems program and in every workshop that we have, because we're really going from one tragedy to the next, or one urgency, or one fire, one problem, whatever, you're going to get a lot of resistance. But if we don't plan and we don't schedule, manage, and monitor this thing, we're going to end up getting to the deadlines and doing it the night before. And you know what quality of work that you're going to get out of that thing. So there's our 12-month schedule, and we need to do that by individual facilitator manager, and then again feed it up through the process, through the facilitator managers, the facilitators, the coordinators, to get back to the steering committee, because the steering committee needs to be managing this. And then our team log. Again, we're going to log all of our teams, and we really want to work on this by facilitator and facilitator manager. The teams, we want to formalize those teams, and we also want to make a copy and pass all this stuff up to make sure that we're monitoring this by the steering committee. Because one of the interesting things, not only by doing it a year in advance, but we get a little better at planning and scheduling. Also too, if a team you're seeing keeps changing their schedule, there's something wrong in there. And that can either be they're not supporting the project, or in fact, one of the managers might be getting the tar whipped out of them, and they keep pulling the team off because they're addressing all these fires. So that's going to be a first sign that there's something wrong with that team. Just like the first sign that there's something wrong with that 1% of that problem employee, starting with absenteeism and tardiness. So then we have the action item form, and really the action item form is individually by teams that as we're doing things or assigning out tasks, is that this is the formal process that we use to manage that thing by team. So we know that we're getting a commitment, we're doing it, and we're holding each other accountable. Because how many meetings we've gone into and we talked about, nobody did the work, we come back and that could literally put the team back behind. Then we have a team minutes form, page 24. The team's minutes form is that when we meet formally as a team, that we're taking minutes of what we're doing. There's also some things on there for action items, quick action, and the whole bit. And that'll be reflected in the minutes in regards to the action items and the whole bit. 25, the monthly overview. If you look at the monthly overview, again, where are we at the end of each month? And monthly overview, you might want to do this weekly. I'm not sure. Depends on the project. And whether the project or the teams are from frontline employees trying to figure out how we're going to install a new piece of equipment, to where we have 45 engineers trying to get this project together, to get the drawings, to get it into production, to where we can get it installed or meet the terms and conditions of our sale. What we need to do is make sure the monthly overview, that we can continually monitor the steering committee of where we're at. Now let's look at page 26. Page 26 is the task team management, because remember we talked about we're going to break these teams down by base work center. That literally breaks it down by process, that breaks down the systems by department and base work center. So we're talking about, we bring in, let's say we have 5 base work centers. We bring them into a team. Now the team is working. Okay, now there's some part that they're going to have to work outside of the team structure. So this task team and this task team structure is where we can manage those task teams that are working out there. Again, from the facilitator manager or from the team that will report this stuff up. We want to know where everybody is at and not necessarily doing it or going to check, but delegate these skills down, that if there's a problem up here or down here, that we can go through the paper process, a formalized system, and find out why things aren't happening. And the other thing is that when you have a formal system and schedule, it puts more accountability into it. And we've heard that term before, and what that's going to do, that's going to help us keep the project on schedule. Because it seems like, and a lot of these projects might be life or death for the organization, but you try to tell that down in the organization to a person that's getting a tar whipped out of them by a 1% negative employee, they're not even thinking about what's best for the company. They're trying to survive. So if you look at this, there's things that are going to be happening all through this project, and we need a process to hold it accountable. And these things will start showing up if we're monitoring the data. So in this task team, let's look at the task team log. Again, this task team log here will be for the steering committee because that's kind of a master of all the task teams that are out there. Then if you look at the task team collection log, that's by team, by facilitator, manager, that they're basically logging all their task teams, and then they're turning this thing in depending on what the steering committee thinks, whether it's monthly, quarterly, or they're just keeping it there to work on it. Now let's look at page 9. That's the formal process for a task team. What are these things that we've got to do out there in that task team? This is the formal process to move us through that. Then we can manage, plan, schedule, and monitor it. Now let's look at page 30. Now page 30 is where we're getting into the Base Work Center, Base Work Systems 2000 kit. These are the forms. No matter what project you're going to need, these are the forms that you're going to need to make sure it's a successful project. Now what you're going to see here is that you're going to see the example. Let's go to page 31. That's the task team form. If you look at that, page 31 is that we're looking at the task team as far as what are the forms that I'm going to need as a team member, as a part of this big project. Here's the team form. And let's look at, then there's the problem statement form, because everything that we're doing all the way down through the process, we want to make sure whatever marching orders that we're getting a clear direction, and a clear direction comes with a good problem statement. 33 is the action item quick action form. Again, here's a blank form that we'll use individually or as a team or as task teams or from the steering committee. These are the forms that we're going to need to make sure when we sign out these particular actions that we're managing, monitoring, and holding accountable. Next is, let's look at page 34. Page 34 is that paperwork and form summary. What we're doing here, and if you remember, the reason that we do this is that because the paperwork involved in whatever particular process that we need is going to be outlined, and the paperwork's going to give us a very good look at that particular system. So what we do is take the paperwork as a starting point, and what that's going to do is that we're going to be able to take that and back it into the systems there. So again, let's look at, here's the form summary. All we're doing is listing down all the forms, all the paperwork, and when we're saying the data entry screens, we want to look at what particular, in those base work centers and processes, is that particular data collection. And we're not saying print out all the computer screens, but print out the first page and write what software program that is, because that's going to also be involved in that process and the success of that project, both long-term and short-term. Next is, let's look at the form procedure, because as we do this, we're also going to have to look at writing those forms and form procedures. So as we're collecting the forms, and you're also going to look and see that there's going to be some forms that are going to be bad. Remember, the forms and paperwork are going to give us and suggest the particular systems. So the form procedure sheet is what we write those form procedures on. Now let's look at page number 36. Page number 36 is really looking at the process and step. Now remember, as we're breaking down these systems and breaking them down by process and base work center, remember the process and step form is literally just like flow charting or process mapping or whatever you want to call it. So in this, all we do is start listing in that particular process or system what we do. And we call it that particular process and the steps of that process. So if you look at this, as we're moving through, we want to make sure that we're all using the same form, and because even up at top, what is this process and steps for? This is how we have to manage all this documentation and all these processes that we're working through. Page 37 is just the second page of that. Now let's look at page 38. 38 is the procedures form. An interesting thing that we want to make sure that we do, because remember, with everything that we're doing, or anybody that touches that, they need to, that particular project or that particular problem, that particular process, they need to be involved not only in the decision making and the procedure, but they also need to be listed here, because as the project progresses, and also too as we define that procedure, as it changes, or whether we're moving it to a new computer software, a new project, or whatever, those folks that are listed up at the top will more than likely be involved in that correction of that system, as well as being trained for the implementation. Now let's look at page 39 is just the second page of that. Procedure form. Let's look at page 40. We're really thinking now of the training and implementation of this thing. This is a check sheet, because remember, for a successful project, we really want to look at making sure all this work we're doing is making sure it's getting trained and making sure that the project and the things that we're putting together is being implemented. Now remember, we cannot hold accountable until we have received the training. And then one of the interesting things here with the training and implementation, what we're doing again is listing all the base work centers that are involved in it that need to receive that training. Then our question is, what are we going to use to train on? We're saying usually the written procedure that's affecting that base work center. So we're going to write it on the flip chart. That's how we're going to do it, and that's what we're going to teach. And then we're going to use it as they get a copy of that process, that step, and that procedure. They're going to take it back to their base work center. So when this stuff starts coming up through the steering committee, now the steering committee not only sees the project moving through in process, step, and procedure by the base work centers, by the people that are involved, but now we're signing off that that deal is done. And that's basically meaning that everybody has received training, everybody has signed off on it, and now we're knocking down one piece of that project at a time. But remember, this is where a lot of the stuff fails. We spend all this time, energy, and effort, and then we don't spend the time to train it to make sure our people. And that's also, too, why we need to make sure the people that are involved in that process has to be involved in the decision making. Next is, as we're going through this, especially on some of the bigger projects, we need to make sure that we have a data collection worksheet. Page 41 is kind of setting up, if we want to collect data for whatever it may be, is that we want to use this form again to help organize our thoughts. And that's what we're saying, a data collection worksheet. And then we're saying down at the bottom, design data collection form. Assign that out as an action item. Who's going to define it, and then who's going to bring it back, and then who's going to collect the data. And if you look at page number 42, I try to develop kind of a generic form that no matter really what kind of data that we're collecting, that we might be able to use this form here. If we can't use that, it's a good start to help you organize your thoughts on what things that have to be involved and have to be included on that sample check sheet. So 42 is kind of the, after we kind of figure out what we need to collect, that's going to show us and give us some guidelines on the design of that check or that data collection. And it's also, we might even use that form because it's a pretty versatile form. Okay. So if you look at what we've talked about now, we have now went through this whole process of project management. We basically organize the steering committee, then we looked at the problem statement, then we looked at making sure we had some structure in place, then we looked at developing and doing preliminary budgets, then we looked at also too making sure all the management were involved. Then we're looking at the facilitator managers. Then we're looking at delegating down into teams, looking at managing the teams. Then we're looking at managing the task teams that will spin out of that. Then we're looking at collecting this data, bringing it in, and moving it up the pike for training. Also, too, down below, we want to be looking at if we're addressing any quality issues in regards to people, personality, or procedure. Now we got some questions and stuff we want to ask. What do you mean by SPMA? What we're saying there is that in order to have a successful project and simplified project management, what we're saying is that let's not make it more difficult than what it is. Really all it is that we're breaking the project down by systems, by departments, by base work centers, by process and step, and we're putting the people in place that are the best ones to make that decision at that particular whatever process it is. Again, why we need those base skills. Why is the management, planning, scheduling, and monitor important to the success of this? Well, we know that because if we're not monitoring the thing and people know that they're not going to be held accountable, we'll always have another reason or another excuse or not have enough time to complete that deal. So how do you delegate events and actions? Number one is by the steering committee. The steering committee gets the deal started. They start doing some preliminary stuff. They start setting up this project. And then we want to look at the training leadership, which makes up all the management internally. And that also has the roles and responsibility that go with it, from the steering committee to the facilitator manager, the coordinator, the team leader, the resource person, and the team members. So that's how we're going to do it. And then we break that further down by the teams. And remember, each of the teams are focusing in their area of expertise and control. Members of the teams are those base work centers that are involved in that particular process or system. And then as we move through in these teams, we have to delegate out these task teams to come bring the information or the completed process back. We can also do this from the top, from the steering committee and from the management. We can also do it from the top and start task teams outside of this thing to help the project along. What is a SPMA worksheet? That's where we're talking about the A through Z to help us organize our thoughts all the way down through to that base work center and that process and step at the base work center through the organization. And all that is to help us organize our thoughts. Because the things on that sheet from A to Z, I guarantee you, no matter what project you're going to do, you're going to use and utilize half of that thing. And then it's the formalized process to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. Why do we have to form teams? Well, if we're going to have a project, we've got to formalize that system to attack that project. And then if we have the teams, we want to set the teams up and manage that and do some planning in there. And then the teams know what their focus is. Instead of how we do it, all of a sudden you show up in your office and now I got something for you to work on. Why do you have to form task teams? Because the team will function to do a particular process and step or procedure for that particular system. But as we're meeting some other issues, we might have to spin out into task teams, and they collect that data outside the team and bring it in. Could we use the task team process only? Yes, you could, depending on how big the organization and the project is. The task team is one of the workshops we've already had, or this workshop that's in here, or this class that's in here. Do the 4 barriers to quality affect the project management? Yes, it does. The bigger the organization, the more it affects it. Do all personnel need base skills at all levels? If so, why? Again, if we're looking at doing and delegating this project down through the organization and making sure it's a success, and remember, who's the best people to tell us how to do the job? It's the people that are doing it. So that's why it's so important up through the organization, not only frontline, but through the organization to have these base skills. Like for you to think about this, and we'll see in one of our other classes, and think about how this will affect what we're doing internally.